I'm Samantha Mitchell. 33 and 15 years ago, my father abandoned me in a motel parking lot with nothing but a suitcase and shattered dreams. The day after my high school graduation, he drove away without a backward glance, leaving me alone and terrified. Last month, I discovered his company was failing the same prestigious Mitchell enterprises that had been more important than his daughter. When I saw his name on those bankruptcy papers, something primal awoke inside me. Sometimes, life offers unexpected opportunities for justice. So I gathered my resources, contacted my team, and bought the company he loves more than me. Before I tell you how a homeless teenager became powerful enough to purchase her father's million-dollar company, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button and like this video if you've ever wanted a second chance to face someone who hurt you. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. 18 years old, valedictorian, full of hopes and dreams. That was me on my high school graduation day. The auditorium buzzed with excitement, parents beaming with pride, but my heart felt hollow. My mother, Lauren, who would have been cheering the loudest, had died from aggressive breast cancer just 1 year earlier. Standing at the podium delivering my speech, I spotted my father Richard in the back row distracted and checking his watch repeatedly. Since Mom died, Dad had become increasingly distant. No more family dinners, no conversations about my college plans, no interest in my perfect GPA or scholarship offers. He was physically present in our home but emotionally absent, often working late at his company Mitchell Enterprises, a mid-sized manufacturing firm that had been growing steadily for years. After the ceremony, we went to dinner at an upscale restaurant, his choice, not mine. I would have preferred the family-owned Italian place Mom loved. "Congratulations," he said flatly, barely looking up from his steak. The speech was good. "Thanks, Dad." I pushed my pasta around the plate. "I got an email from Berkeley. They're offering me additional scholarship money." He nodded. "Good. You'll need it." The ominous tone in his voice didn't register then. We ate in silence, the weight of Mom's absence hanging between us. When we arrived home, I noticed his car packed with suitcases. Mine, I would soon learn. "Come inside, Samantha. We need to talk," he said, with an unusual formality. In our living room now stripped of family photos and Mom's decorative touches, 2 large suitcases and a duffel bag sat waiting. "What's going on?" I asked, my heart racing. "I've decided it's time for both of us to move forward." He began, standing stiffly by the fireplace. "I've sold the house. The new owners take possession next week." "You what without telling me?" My voice cracked. "I've met someone. Cynthia. We're getting married next month." He spoke mechanically, like reciting a business proposal. "She has 2 children, and we're buying a place in Westview Hills." "And me," I whispered, already knowing the answer from the luggage. "You're 18 now, Samantha. An adult. It's time to cut ties." The clinical coldness in his voice still haunts me. He explained that he'd packed my essentials. The rest of my belongings, my childhood, my memories had been donated or discarded. "Your mother coddled you, made you dependent." His voice hardened. "I'm not interested in supporting another adult. Cynthia's children need stability, and frankly, I don't want the burden anymore." Burden. The word struck like a physical blow. But what about college Mom's life insurance was supposed to pay for? "That money is gone," he interrupted. "Hospital bills, funeral expenses. I need what's left to start fresh." He reached into his pocket and handed me 5 $100 bills. "This should get you started." I stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. He checked his watch impatiently. "I've booked you a room at the Starlight Motel for tonight. After that, you're on your own." The drive to the motel was surreal. 20 minutes earlier, I'd been a high school valedictorian with a bright future. Now, I was being discarded like outdated inventory. He pulled into the motel parking lot, a dingy place with flickering neon and peeling paint. Your mother would have wanted you to be independent, he said, not looking at me as he unloaded my bags. A lie. Mom had dreamed of seeing me graduate college. Standing there in my nice graduation dinner dress, I struggled to find words. Dad, please. But he was already sliding back into his car. Good luck, Samantha. I watched his taillights disappear, then collapsed onto the curb beside my bags. Panic clawed at my throat as reality set in. I was homeless, alone, abandoned. That night, I curled up on a stained motel bed graduation cap, still in its box, and sobbed until no tears remained. The daughter he no longer wanted. The burden he'd discarded. The future that had evaporated in one cruel conversation. The Starlight Motel allowed me to stay 3 nights with the money my father had given me. By morning 2, the panic had hardened into something more practical survival mode. I counted my resources $390, remaining a suitcase of clothes, my laptop, and the small jewelry box containing Mom's wedding ring and pearl earrings items I'd hidden in my sock drawer after her death, somehow knowing they needed protection. On day 3, I met Caitlin, the hotel manager, who found me crying in the ice machine alcove, researching homeless shelters on my phone. Checkout's at 11, she said, then paused. Everything okay, honey? Something about her kind eyes broke my careful composure. The whole story tumbled out between sobs. Caitlin listened, her expression darkening. Your father did what? She shook her head in disbelief. Listen, we need housekeeping help. The pay's minimum wage, but you can stay in the staff room until you figure things out. For 3 weeks, I scrubbed toilets and changed sheets by day, applying for scholarships and cheaper community colleges by night. My Berkeley dream vanished when I learned my father had emptied my college fund money from both his contributions and Mom's life insurance that had been designated for my education. Through Caitlin's church connections, I found a shared apartment with 3 other girls, a dental assistant, a waitress, and a nursing student. My room was barely larger than a closet, but it was mine. I took on a second job waiting tables at a diner, and eventually a weekend gig stocking shelves at a supermarket. 3 jobs, community college applications, and 4 hours of sleep became my new normal. 2 months into this exhausting routine, I experienced my second betrayal. While serving breakfast at the diner, I spotted my father with a woman and 2 teenagers at a corner table. My heart leaped. Maybe he'd had a change of heart. Maybe he was looking for me. I approached their table, hands trembling. Dad. He looked up, his expression flickering between shock and annoyance. The woman, Cynthia, I presumed, glanced between us confused. Can I help you? My father's voice was cold, unfamiliar. It's me, Samantha. He cleared his throat. I think you have me confused with someone else. Then to Cynthia. Just one of the servers. Let's order. I stood frozen, the ultimate rejection washing over me. He hadn't just abandoned me, he'd erased me. That night I considered giving up, dropping out of my community college classes, accepting that life would always be this hard. Then I met Blake Harris. He was in my economics 101 class, confident and sharp-witted. When our professor assigned group projects, Blake immediately claimed me as his partner. You're the only one who asks good questions, he explained. Everyone else is just trying to pass. Working on our project at a local coffee shop, I mentioned my struggle to afford textbooks. Why not just get the digital versions, he asked. My laptop died last week, I admitted. I'm saving for another one. Blake's eyes narrowed. 3 jobs, full course load, and no computer. How are you managing? My carefully constructed facade cracked. For the second time since my abandonment, I found myself telling my story to a stranger. Unlike Caitlin's immediate sympathy, Blake's reaction was calculating. Your father's Richard Mitchell, of Mitchell Enterprises. I nodded, surprised. My dad does business with that company. Mitchell has been telling people his daughter had drug problems and ran away after stealing from him. He's played the devastated father routine. The character assassination felt worse than the abandonment. Not only had he discarded me, he destroyed my reputation to protect his. Blake became my first true ally in this new life. He loaned me his old laptop, connected me with a study group, and most importantly, believed in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. "You're going to succeed just despite him," Blake said one night, after helping me study for finals. "And I'm going to enjoy watching you do it." A year of relentless work later, I earned a partial scholarship to the State University's business program. Not Berkeley, but a path forward. The night I received the acceptance letter, I allowed myself a small celebration, a pint of ice cream, and a whispered promise to my mother that I wouldn't let her daughter disappear. 2 years after my father abandoned me in that motel parking lot, my life had found a tentative rhythm. I'd transferred to State University's business program, maintained a 4 gigapascals, while working 30 hours weekly at an accountant's office, and moved into a slightly better apartment with just one roommate. The immediate terror of homelessness had subsided, replaced by a grinding determination to never be vulnerable again. My breakthrough came in Professor Rachel Thompson's Advanced Business Strategy course. Unlike other professors who lectured at students, Rachel engaged with us, challenging our thinking and encouraging creative approaches to business problems. After I submitted a particularly innovative analysis of a failing company's potential turnaround, Rachel asked me to stay after class. "You have a natural talent for seeing value where others see failure," she said, studying me with intelligent eyes. "That's rare, Samantha." I shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. "I just understand what it's like to need a second chance." Rachel became more than a professor. She became a mentor, inviting me to business networking events and recommending advanced readings. For the first time since losing my mother, I had someone genuinely invested in my future. Then came my first significant betrayal in the business world. My roommate Jessica and I had become friendly, though not close. She was studying marketing and often asked about my business coursework. When Professor Thompson announced a prestigious business plan competition with a $10,000 prize and guaranteed internship, I spent weeks developing an innovative financial services concept aimed at helping disadvantaged young adults establish credit and savings. 2 days before the deadline, I returned to our apartment to find my laptop missing. Jessica claimed no knowledge of its whereabouts. I submitted a hastily recreated proposal using the university computers, but the damage was done. At the competition finals, I watched in shock as Jessica presented my exact concept slide by slide, point by point. She'd stolen my laptop to copy my work, then returned it, found in the apartment building's laundry room after the submission deadline. The judges awarded her second place and a $5,000 prize. When I confronted her, her response chilled me. "It's just business, Sam. Nothing personal." Professor Thompson believed my story, but explained there was little the university could do without definitive proof. However, she taught me my first valuable lesson in protecting myself. In business, Samantha, your ideas are currency. Guard them carefully until you're powerful enough that stealing from you has consequences. Rachel's connections helped me secure a legitimate internship at Hayes Investments, a boutique firm specializing in corporate restructuring. During my interview, I encountered another unsettling reminder of my father's influence. "Mitchell. Any relation to Richard Mitchell?" the interviewer asked casually. "He's my father," I answered cautiously. The interviewer's expression changed subtly. "I see. We know Richard quite well. He's mentioned his daughter had some challenges." Later, I learned through office gossip that my father had systematically contacted business associates, warning them against hiring his troubled daughter. His campaign to erase me had extended to sabotaging my professional future. When I shared this with Rachel, she wasn't surprised. "Powerful men don't like loose ends," she said. "You're living proof of his callousness, and that makes you dangerous." At Hayes Investments, I discovered my true talent, identifying struggling companies with hidden potential. I could analyze balance sheets and operations reports and see opportunities others missed. My first project involved a family-owned manufacturing company facing bankruptcy after the founder's death. This business isn't failing because the product is bad, I explained to my supervisor. It's failing because the transition plan was inadequate. The company's structure can be saved with targeted restructuring. My analysis proved correct. The company survived, jobs were preserved, and I earned the respect of the senior partners. During those 2 years at Hayes, I began to see business not just as a career path, but as a potential avenue for security. In the corporate world, respect came from results, not relationships. Numbers didn't care about family loyalty or emotional connections. Performance could be measured objectively. I began studying successful corporate takeovers and acquisitions with particular interest. Something about the strategic chess game of business warfare appealed to the part of me that had been wounded by my father's betrayal. I wasn't yet planning revenge, but I was learning the weapons of corporate combat. By the time I graduated with my business degree, I had a solid foundation of knowledge, a growing professional network, and a clearer vision for my future. The abandoned girl from the motel parking lot was disappearing, replaced by a focused young woman with increasingly sharp edges. Rachel recognized this transformation during our graduation dinner. "You've come so far," she said, "but don't let what happened to you harden you completely. The best business leaders know when to be ruthless and when to be compassionate." I nodded, but privately wondered if compassion was a luxury I could afford. Every night before sleep, I still saw my father's taillights disappearing from that motel parking lot, leaving me alone with nothing but a suitcase and his indifference. At 23, 5 years after my father abandoned me, I achieved my first significant professional milestone, junior investment analyst at Hayes Investments, with my own small portfolio of clients. My tiny studio apartment had few furnishings, but an impressive collection of business and finance books. My social life was nearly non-existent, but my bank account finally had a cushion beyond immediate survival needs. My breakthrough came when I was assigned to analyze Hartwell Manufacturing, a family-owned business facing a hostile takeover attempt by a larger competitor. The company made specialized medical equipment components, not particularly glamorous, but essential and profitable when properly managed. After 3 sleepless nights reviewing their financials and operations, I discovered the company wasn't failing. It was being deliberately undermined by its CFO, who was secretly working with a competitor attempting the takeover. If you restructure your supply chain, replace your CFO, and modernize these 3 production lines, I explained to James Hartwell, the company's second-generation owner, you can increase profitability by 23% within 6 months. My detailed defense strategy saved Hartwell Manufacturing from the takeover. More importantly, it saved 67 jobs and a family's legacy. The quarterly bonus I received was the largest single payment I'd ever seen in my life. That evening, Blake, who had become both my closest friend and occasional romantic interest over the years, and Rachel took me to dinner at an upscale restaurant to celebrate. To Samantha Mitchell, Blake raised his glass, financial genius and corporate savior. Rachel smiled proudly. "I always knew you'd excel, but even I'm impressed by how quickly you're rising." For a moment, genuine happiness washed over me. I had people who believed in me. I had professional success. I had created something from nothing after starting with less than nothing. 2 days later, Thomas Jensen appeared at my office. He was my father's oldest friend and business associate, a silver-haired executive with an imposing presence. I recognized him immediately from childhood dinners at our home, though I hadn't seen him since before my mother's death. "Samantha," he smiled warmly, extending his hand. "My God, you've grown into a beautiful young woman." I kept my expression neutral. "Mr. Jensen, what can I do for you?" "Please call me Thomas. We're practically family." He settled into the chair across from my desk. I've been hearing remarkable things about your work, especially with Hartwell Manufacturing. My defenses rose immediately. How did you hear about that? Word travels in business circles. He waved dismissively. I've come to make amends, Samantha. What happened with your father? It wasn't right. For years, I'd imagined confrontations with my father or his associates, imagined screaming, demanding explanations, seeking justice. But sitting across from Thomas, I felt only a cool analytical curiosity. Amends, I repeated carefully. Yes, I should have reached out sooner. He leaned forward. Your father was going through a difficult time after your mother's death. He made poor decisions. Abandoning his daughter with $500 and destroying her reputation was more than a poor decision. I replied evenly. Thomas had the grace to look uncomfortable. Yes, well, that's why I'm here. I'd like to help you, Samantha. Mentor you. Your talents are clearly exceptional. Over the next month, Thomas met with me weekly. He shared industry insights, introduced me to influential contacts, and even brought me confidential information about potential client acquisitions. My suspicion never fully subsided, but the valuable intelligence he provided seemed genuine. Then he began asking detailed questions about my clients, particularly those with proprietary technologies or vulnerable leadership structures. When I provided only vague answers, he grew increasingly persistent. Hartwell's new medical sensor technology, what stage is it in? Have they secured the patents he pressed during one lunch? I can't discuss client specifics, I replied. Don't be so rigid, Samantha. This is how business relationships work, information sharing, mutual benefit. My suspicions crystallized. That night, I called a college acquaintance who worked at Mitchell Enterprises and invited her to drinks. After some careful conversation, she confirmed my fears. Thomas Jensen and my father were planning several aggressive acquisitions targeting companies they believed had weaknesses, the very companies Thomas had been asking me about. I set a trap. During our next meeting, I casually mentioned that Hartwell was struggling with their banking covenants and might need emergency capital. The information was completely false. 3 days later, my contact at Mitchell Enterprises reported that Richard Mitchell had suddenly directed his team to prepare an acquisition offer for Hartwell, citing inside information about financial instability. The betrayal was exactly what I'd suspected, but still stung sharply. I requested a final meeting with Thomas at a coffee shop near my office. I know what you're doing, I said without preamble. You've been gathering intelligence for my father. Thomas's friendly facade dropped instantly. You're as sharp as he said you'd be. Why the elaborate charade, I asked. Why not just approach our clients directly? Richard wanted to know how much of a threat you've become, Thomas replied, his voice now cold. He's been watching your career with interest. Interest? He abandoned me. Told everyone I was a drug addict who stole from him. Thomas shrugged. Unnecessary narrative. His new wife didn't want complications from his previous life. The casual cruelty took my breath away. My entire existence had been erased as a complication. I'll give you one opportunity to make this right, Thomas continued with condescending confidence. Resign from Hayes, sign an NDA regarding our conversations, and I'll arrange a very generous severance package. Your father is willing to ensure you're comfortable provided you pursue opportunities outside his sphere of influence. For the first time since my abandonment, white-hot rage replaced my careful composure. But instead of the emotional outburst Thomas clearly expected, I channeled that anger into precise calculation. I need to consider your offer, I said calmly. That evening, I compiled a comprehensive file documenting Thomas's attempts to extract confidential client information, including recorded conversations, legal in our state, with single-party consent, and his explicit admission of working on my father's behalf. I added documentation of similar approaches he'd made to other analysts, uncovered through discreet conversations with colleagues. The next morning, I requested a meeting with Hayes Investments' Board of Directors and Ethics Committee. I presented my evidence, methodically emphasizing the potential damage to client relationships and firm reputation. 2 days later, Thomas Jensen was forced to resign from his own firm amid an ethics investigation. The business press covered the story extensively, though, without specific details of his misconduct. My name never appeared in the coverage. I'd been careful to position myself as merely one of several analysts who had reported concerns. That night, Blake brought takeout to my apartment as we watched the business news coverage of Jensen's downfall. "How does it feel?" he asked. I considered the question carefully. "It feels like the first step." First step toward what? I turned to him, something cold and determined settling in my chest. Becoming someone who can never be discarded again. By 28, I had transformed from a promising analyst to a respected investment strategist with a growing reputation for turning around struggling companies. My personal style had evolved alongside my career designer, suits, sleek bob haircut, and a polished professionalism that masked the abandoned girl I had once been. Blake and I had maintained our close friendship despite a brief romantic relationship that had fizzled due to my workaholic tendencies. His MBA and complementary skills in marketing and client relations made him the perfect business partner when we finally took the leap to establish our own small consulting firm, Mitchell Hayes Strategic Solutions. "Are you sure you want to use your father's name?" Blake asked as we finalized the paperwork. "Absolutely," I replied. "I want him to see it." Our boutique firm specialized in identifying undervalued businesses with turnaround potential. We started small, one office, 3 employees besides ourselves, and a handful of clients, but our success rate quickly generated industry attention. At a financial industry conference in Chicago, I met Ryan Blackwood, a charming venture capitalist with connections to several private equity firms. He approached me after my presentation on strategic corporate restructuring. "Your analysis of distressed asset valuation was brilliant," he said, his handshake firm and confident. "I've never heard anyone articulate those principles so clearly." Over drinks, Ryan expressed interest in bringing investors to our firm. His enthusiasm seemed genuine, his knowledge impressive, and his network extensive. When he mentioned potential clients with budgets far exceeding our current portfolio, I felt a surge of excitement about accelerating our growth trajectory. Blake, however, was skeptical from the beginning. "Something about him doesn't add up," he said, after meeting Ryan for dinner. "His track record shows multiple short-term engagements with firms that later struggled. Have you verified his investor connection?" I dismissed Blake's concerns as overprotectiveness. "Not everyone has a hidden agenda, Blake. Sometimes opportunities are just opportunities." This disagreement created the first serious rift in our relationship. Blake felt I was being recklessly trusting. I felt he was being needlessly paranoid. As Ryan became more involved in our business development efforts, Blake grew increasingly distant. With Ryan's introductions, our client roster expanded rapidly. We hired additional staff and moved to larger offices. The growth was intoxicating, finally tangible proof that I had overcome my father's attempts to destroy my future. 6 months into our partnership with Ryan, we landed our biggest client yet, Westridge Healthcare, a regional hospital management company seeking restructuring before a potential sale. The contract value alone would double our annual revenue. 2 days before our presentation of the comprehensive strategy to Westridge's board, I received an urgent call from our primary contact there. "Miss Mitchell, I'm afraid we need to cancel tomorrow's meeting. We've decided to go in another direction." Confused, I pressed for details. After some hesitation, she admitted they'd been approached by another consulting firm offering a nearly identical strategy at a significantly lower price point. The lead consultant had implied they had insider knowledge of our approach through a partnership arrangement. My blood ran cold. Was the consultant's name Ryan Blackwood? Her silence was confirmation enough. After hanging up, I launched a frantic investigation. What I discovered devastated me. Ryan had been systematically approaching our clients, leveraging our strategic plans, and undercutting our pricing. Worse, several emails recovered from our server showed he had been sharing our proprietary methodologies with a company called Blackwood Mitchell Ventures. The second half of that name hit me like a physical blow. I confronted Ryan in our conference room that evening, digital evidence displayed on the screen behind me. "You've been working with my father all along," I said, maintaining a calm I didn't feel. Ryan's charming facade dissolved into something colder. "Business isn't personal, Samantha. It's about identifying vulnerabilities and leveraging them. And my vulnerability was trusting you." He shrugged. "Your father said you'd be too focused on proving yourself to see the obvious." He was right. "Why?" I demanded. "Why would he invest so much effort in sabotaging me?" "You're a loose thread in the narrative he's created," Ryan replied. "A successful, visible Samantha Mitchell contradicts the story he's told his new family, his colleagues, himself. Plus," he added with cruel casualness, "he simply doesn't like that you've survived without him. He expected you to fail." The realization that my father was still actively working to destroy me years after discarding me sent a wave of nausea through my body. This wasn't neglect or indifference. This was deliberate, sustained malice. When Ryan left, I sat alone in the darkened conference room facing the most significant crisis of my professional life. We had lost our largest client, our reputation was at risk, and my father was still pulling strings to ensure my failure. I called Blake at 2 in the morning. "You were right about Ryan," I said when he answered. "He's been working with my father." To his credit, Blake didn't say, "I told you so." Instead, he simply asked, "What do we need to do?" Over the next 72 hours, Blake worked tirelessly to salvage our client relationships while I rebuilt our security protocols and legal protections. We lost 3 major clients despite our efforts, but Blake's relationships saved the majority of our portfolio. Our personal relationship remained strained. My dismissal of his concerns had nearly cost us everything, but our professional partnership emerged stronger. We implemented new confidentiality measures, revised our client contracts, and became far more selective about our business associates. 1 month after Ryan's betrayal, I received an anonymous envelope containing photographs of my father with Ryan at various meetings, along with a handwritten note. "Thought you should know the full picture." The sender remained a mystery, but the message was clear. My father's determination to sabotage me hadn't diminished with time. That night, I made a decision that would alter the trajectory of my career and life. If Richard Mitchell was willing to continue his campaign against me indefinitely, I needed to become too powerful for him to touch. Self-defense required more than success, it required power. "We need to change our approach," I told Blake the next morning. "Consulting is vulnerable. We need to build something more substantial." "What are you thinking?" "Acquisitions," I replied. "Instead of advising companies, we should be buying them, fixing them, and either selling at a profit or building a portfolio." Blake studied me carefully. "That's a completely different business model. It would require significant capital. Then we'll raise the capital. We'll find investors who believe in our track record." Samantha, Blake said gently, "Is this about building a business or about your father?" The question struck uncomfortably close to the truth. "Does it matter if the strategy is sound?" He considered this. "I suppose not, as long as we don't lose ourselves in the process." I wasn't sure what remained of my original self to lose. The abandoned girl had been replaced by a woman, determined never to be vulnerable again. If that transformation required becoming someone my father would fear rather than dismiss, so be it. "Mitchell Hayes Acquisitions," I said, testing the name. It has a nice ring to it. Blake nodded slowly. Partners. I extended my hand. Partners. That handshake marked the beginning of a new chapter 1 where I stopped running from my father's shadow and began deliberately moving toward a confrontation neither of us could have imagined 5 years earlier. Age 30 marked a pivotal transformation in both my business approach and personal identity. The consultancy that had nearly been destroyed by my father's machinations was reborn as Mitchell Hayes Acquisitions, with a bold new strategy focused on purchasing controlling interests in struggling but fundamentally sound businesses. Blake and I secured initial investment capital through a combination of our own savings loans against our existing business assets and 2 angel investors who believed in our track record of corporate turnarounds. Our first acquisition was modest, a small manufacturing company that supplied specialized components to the automotive industry, but it established our operational model. We don't strip assets and sell the husk, I explained to our growing team. We identify the core value, eliminate inefficiencies, and restore profitability with the existing workforce wherever possible. This philosophy differentiated us from typical corporate raiders and resonated with business owners facing retirement or succession challenges. Word spread that Mitchell Hayes offered a more humane alternative to traditional private equity vultures. As our portfolio expanded, I developed a reputation in business circles as the Phoenix, a reference to my ability to resurrect companies from the ashes of near bankruptcy. The irony wasn't lost on me. The daughter discarded as worthless had become known for finding value in what others had given up on. Our third year of acquisitions brought Gabriela Rodriguez into our orbit. A brilliant financial strategist with experience at major investment banks, she approached us after reading about our turnaround of a medical supply company. Your valuation models are innovative, she told me during our first meeting, but you're leaving money on the table in your financing structures. She proceeded to outline 3 specific ways we could optimize our capital deployment to accelerate growth. I hired her on the spot, creating a new position as Chief Financial Strategist. Gabriela quickly became my second trusted ally, complementing Blake's operational expertise with her financial acumen. Where Blake was cautious and relationship-focused, Gabriela was bold and analytically sharp. Between the 3 of us, we created a formidable leadership team. With Gabriela's strategies implemented, we expanded aggressively, moving beyond small manufacturers to mid-sized companies across diverse industries. I developed a particular interest in acquiring businesses with connections to my father's associates' companies where Thomas Jensen or others in my father's circle held board positions or significant investments. These acquisitions seem personal, Blake observed after our 4th such purchase. They're strategically sound investments, I countered. They can be both, Gabriela interjected. Strategic and satisfying. She understood better than Blake the psychological satisfaction of watching my father's colleagues squirm as Mitchell Hayes systematically expanded into their territory. None of these moves directly threatened Mitchell Enterprises, but they sent an unmistakable message. Samantha Mitchell was no longer an abandoned girl to be dismissed, she was a force to be reckoned with. The psychological toll of my revenge-adjacent motivations manifested in other ways. I worked punishing hours rarely dated and maintained few personal relationships outside of Blake and Gabriela. My apartment, though now luxurious, remained minimally furnished, as if some part of me still didn't trust in permanence. During a charity gala I attended to network with potential investors, I experienced an unexpected encounter. While at the bar, I overheard a familiar name. James is following in Richard's footsteps at Mitchell Enterprises, a woman was saying. And Sophia just got accepted to Princeton. I turned slightly, catching sight of a well-dressed couple in their 40s. With a jolt, I realized these must be my father's stepchildren, the replacement family for whom I'd been discarded. They were approximately my age, or slightly younger, polished, and confident, clearly accustomed to privilege. Neither resembled me in any way. They wouldn't have recognized me even if they knew I existed. To them, I was just another business executive at a charity function. For a moment, I considered introducing myself. Imagine the shock on their faces learning about their stepfather's abandoned daughter. Wondered if they knew anything of my existence, or if my father had completely erased me from his narrative. I ultimately decided against the confrontation. These people weren't my enemies. They were unwitting beneficiaries of my father's cruelty. The real target of my rising power remained Richard Mitchell himself. The following week, a major business journal published a feature profiling America's new business prodigies, emerging leaders reshaping their industries. The article highlighted Mitchell Hayes Acquisitions' innovative approach to corporate turnarounds and my personal journey from entry-level analyst to CEO of a rapidly growing investment firm. Though the piece mentioned nothing about my estrangement from my father, the prominence of my surname alongside my success created exactly the visibility I'd been building toward. Richard Mitchell could no longer pretend his daughter had disappeared into failure and obscurity. 3 days after the article published, Gabriella entered my office with an unusual expression, a mixture of excitement and caution. "I've been hearing some interesting chatter through my banking contacts," she said, closing the door behind her. "Mitchell Enterprises is facing serious cash flow problems. They've approached several lenders about emergency financing." A strange feeling washed over me, not quite satisfaction, not quite dread. "How serious?" I asked. "Potentially catastrophic. Their main manufacturing division has been losing market share for years, and they've overextended on several acquisitions. Richard Mitchell has been borrowing against his ownership stake to maintain operations. For years, I'd been building my power and influence with a vague notion of someday being untouchable by my father. I'd never specifically planned to witness his downfall, much less cause it. Yet here was an opportunity, materializing without my direct action. "Keep monitoring the situation," I told Gabriella. Discreetly. That night, I dreamed of the motel parking lot where he'd abandoned me, except in the dream I was watching from a distance as he abandoned a younger version of myself. I woke feeling unsettled, questioning my own motivations and the person I'd become in pursuit of security and validation. Blake noticed my distraction during our morning strategy meeting. "Everything okay?" he asked after the others had left. I hesitated, then shared Gabriella's intelligence about Mitchell Enterprises. "What are you thinking?" he asked carefully. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me feels this is justice. Part of me wonders if I'm becoming as coldly calculating as he was." Blake considered this. "There's a difference between being calculating and being cruel. You've never abandoned anyone who depended on you. You've never destroyed someone's reputation to protect your ego. Your father did both without hesitation." His words provided some comfort, but the question remained, what would I do with this information about my father's failing company? The answer would reveal what kind of person I'd truly become in the 15 years since being discarded with nothing but a suitcase and shattered dreams. At 33, I had transformed Mitchell Hayes Acquisitions into a formidable player in the corporate restructuring world. Our portfolio included 17 companies across manufacturing, healthcare, and technology sectors, with a combined workforce exceeding 2,000 employees. The abandoned teenager with a suitcase had built an empire. I was reviewing quarterly projections in my corner office when Gabriella knocked on my door, her expression uncharacteristically animated. "It's happening," she said without preamble, placing a financial analysis on my desk. "Mitchell Enterprises is officially in crisis." The documents revealed what insiders had been whispering for months. Richard Mitchell's company was teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. A combination of outdated manufacturing processes, failed expansion attempts, and several costly lawsuits had depleted their cash reserves. Most damning was evidence that Richard had been artificially inflating performance metrics to maintain investor confidence. They're seeking a bailout investment of $42 million to avoid bankruptcy proceedings, Gabriella continued. 3 potential investors have already walked away after due diligence. A strange numbness spread through me as I studied the figures. For 15 years, Richard Mitchell had been both the architect of my greatest pain and the shadow driving my relentless ambition. Now he was facing the very fate he'd feared enough to discard his daughter's financial failure and public humiliation. What do we know about their operations, their workforce? I asked. Gabriella raised an eyebrow. They employ approximately 500 people across 4 facilities. Their primary manufacturing plant in Westfield has been in operation for 30 years. 500 families, I murmured. Samantha Gabriella said carefully, "Are you considering what I think you're considering?" I looked up from the papers. We need more information before I decide anything. Over the next week, our team conducted a thorough but discreet investigation of Mitchell Enterprises. The company had fundamentally sound products and loyal customers, but suffered from outdated management practices and Richard's increasingly erratic leadership. The decline had accelerated following Thomas Jensen's ethics scandal and subsequent departure from their board. Most concerning were my father's recent decisions slashing employee benefits to preserve executive bonuses, mortgaging company assets for short-term capital, and repeatedly misleading shareholders about the severity of their financial situation. I called Blake and Gabriella to my apartment for a Saturday strategy session. My living room transformed into a war room, with financial statements, market analyses, and potential acquisition scenarios covering every surface. Objectively speaking, is Mitchell Enterprises a sound acquisition target? I asked them. Blake studied the operational assessments. With significant restructuring and capital investment, yes. Their core product line remains competitive, and their engineering team has several promising innovations that haven't been properly developed. But the turnaround would be challenging even by our standards. The numbers support Blake's assessment, Gabriella added. We'd need to invest approximately $50 million for acquisition and another $20 million for restructuring, but the 5-year projections show solid returns. It's within our capability, especially if we leverage our banking relationships. I paced the length of my apartment, weighing the implications. And if we acquired them through shell companies to hide our identity initially? Gabriella nodded. Entirely feasible. We could use our standard acquisition vehicles to make the initial approach with Mitchell Hayes, revealed as the parent company only after the deal is finalized. Blake had been unusually quiet. Now he looked up from the documents, his expression troubled. Samantha, we need to discuss the real issue here. Is this a business decision or a revenge play? The question hung in the air between us. Does it matter if it's a sound investment? Either way, I countered. It matters to me, Blake said quietly. And it should matter to you. This isn't just about buying a struggling company, it's about confronting the man who abandoned you. That makes it personal in ways our other acquisitions haven't been. He was right, of course. Despite my attempts to frame this as purely strategic, the truth was undeniable. Acquiring Mitchell Enterprises represented the ultimate reckoning with my past. What would you do with the company if we acquired it? Blake pressed. What would you do with your father? The question caught me off guard. In all my considerations, I'd focused on the acquisition itself, not its aftermath. I don't know, I admitted. Then you need to figure that out before we move forward, Blake insisted. Because whatever decision you make will define not just the company, but who you've become. That night after they left, I sat alone in my darkened apartment contemplating Blake's challenge. What did I truly want from this potential acquisition? Financial returns, public vindication. My father's humiliation. His acknowledgement of the damage he'd caused. The questions followed me into restless dreams, where I alternated between the abandoned teenager in a motel parking lot and the powerful executive I'd become. Morning brought no clarity, only a sense that this decision represented a crossroads in my life. I sought professional guidance for the first time in years, scheduling an emergency session with a therapist specializing in family trauma. It sounds like you've built your entire adult identity around proving your father wrong, Dr. Winters observed after I'd explained my situation. What happens to that identity if you succeed? The question unsettled me deeply. Who was Samantha Mitchell without the driving force of paternal rejection? What would motivate me if that particular ghost was finally exorcised? Over the next 2 weeks, I conducted a thorough assessment, not just of Mitchell Enterprises, but of my own motivations. I revisited painful memories I'd locked away the night in the motel, the years of financial struggle, the systematic attempts to sabotage my career. I also reflected on what I'd built, a successful company that treated employees fairly, created value rather than extracted it, and provided second chances to struggling businesses. Whatever my initial motivations, the results had largely been positive. After extensive deliberation, I called Blake and Gabriella to my office. "I've made a decision," I announced. "We're going to acquire Mitchell Enterprises." Gabriella nodded, unsurprised. Blake looked concerned. But I continued, "We're going to do it right. This isn't about destroying the company, or even destroying my father. It's about saving 500 jobs and building something better than he could." "That's not what I expected," Blake admitted. "The best revenge isn't destruction," I said, surprising myself with the clarity of conviction. "It's success. We're going to make Mitchell Enterprises more successful without Richard Mitchell than it ever was with him." Over the following days, we developed a comprehensive acquisition strategy. Gabriella established several shell companies to make the initial approach, while Blake prepared operational assessments and restructuring plans. We secured financing commitments from our banking partners and prepared detailed presentations for our board of directors. The plan was meticulously crafted. We would offer fair market value through our intermediaries, positioning ourselves as the only viable alternative to bankruptcy. Once the deal was approved by Mitchell Enterprises' desperate board, we would reveal Mitchell Hayes as the true acquirer just before closing, too late for Richard to derail the process without triggering immediate financial collapse. Each night, as I reviewed the developing strategy, I questioned my motives anew. Was this justice, or vendetta business, or personal? The answer I finally accepted was both. The abandoned girl and the successful businesswoman had finally aligned their purposes. The night before we launched our acquisition plan, I visited my mother's grave for the first time in years. Standing before her headstone in the fading light, I spoke aloud the words I'd held inside for 15 years. "He threw me away, Mom. Like I was nothing. But I survived. I built something. And tomorrow I'm taking back our name." As I placed flowers on her grave, a sense of calm purpose replaced the turmoil of recent weeks. Whatever happened next, I was ready. The acquisition plan unfolded with precision over the next month. Our shell companies made initial inquiries through third-party intermediaries, expressing interest in Mitchell Enterprises as a potential rescue investment. Given the company's dire financial circumstances, Richard Mitchell and his board eagerly pursued these discussions. Gabriella masterfully orchestrated the financial aspects, ensuring our identity remained concealed while maintaining the appearance of standard due diligence. Blake coordinated operational assessments, gathering crucial information about the company's structure, workforce, and immediate challenges. When our formal offer arrived at Mitchell Enterprises, $48 million for a controlling interest contingent on leadership changes, their board approved it within 24 hours. They had no viable alternatives. Bankruptcy loomed within weeks without an immediate capital infusion. Only after the board's approval and signed preliminary agreements did we reveal Mitchell Hayes Acquisitions as the parent company behind the shell entities. The disclosure was strategically timed to prevent Richard from derailing the deal without triggering immediate financial collapse and personal liability. The morning of the final closing meeting, I stood before my closet considering my appearance more carefully than I had for any previous business engagement. I selected a precisely tailored charcoal suit pearl earrings that had belonged to my mother and subtle makeup that emphasized the features I'd inherited from her. "Are you ready for this?" Blake asked when he picked me up in the company car. "I've been preparing for 15 years, I replied, surprised by my own calm. Mitchell Enterprises occupied a gleaming office tower downtown, an extravagant headquarters that had contributed to their financial problems. The contrast with the dingy motel where my father had abandoned me couldn't have been more stark. Our team arrived early for the meeting, taking our places in the executive boardroom. I positioned myself at the head of the table, with Blake and Gabriella flanking me, our attorneys and financial advisors completing our side. At precisely 9 o'clock, Mitchell Enterprises board members began filing in, nervous men and women in expensive suits, their faces drawn with the strain of impending corporate failure. They regarded us with a mixture of relief and wariness, clearly uncertain about their own futures under new ownership. "Mr. Mitchell is running a few minutes behind," his executive assistant announced apologetically. "He asks that you begin without him." "Actually," I replied, "we'll wait." The tension in the room intensified as the minutes ticked by. I remained perfectly still, maintaining eye contact with various board members until they looked away uncomfortably. Many of these people had served my father for years. Some had likely been complicit in his campaign against me. Their discomfort was a minor but satisfying appetizer to the main confrontation. At 9:17, the boardroom doors swung open. Richard Mitchell strode in with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to controlling rooms. At 58, his hair had grayed considerably, and stress had carved deep lines around his mouth, but his posture remained rigid with pride. "Apologies for the delay," he announced without actually sounding sorry. "Traffic was—" His voice died as his eyes finally registered my presence at the head of the table. For a moment, genuine shock transformed his features as recognition dawned. "What is this?" he demanded, looking wildly at his board members. "What is she doing here?" I rose slowly from my chair. "Good morning, Father. It's been 15 years. The color drained from his face as understanding crashed over him. "This is impossible. The acquisition is proceeding exactly as planned," I finished for him. "Mitchell Hayes Acquisitions is the parent company behind Phoenix Capital Partners. We now own controlling interest in Mitchell Enterprises effective upon completion of today's closing." He looked to his attorneys, desperate for escape. "This is a conflict of interest. It's fraud." The lead counsel for Mitchell Enterprises cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Actually, Mr. Mitchell, all disclosures were legally made at the appropriate time. The board has already approved the transaction." "Cancel it," my father snapped. "That would trigger immediate default on your outstanding loans." Gabriella interjected calmly. "Without our capital infusion, Mitchell Enterprises would face bankruptcy by month's end. Your personal guarantees on several of those loans would leave you individually exposed to significant liability." Richard Mitchell, the man who had abandoned his daughter with calculated cruelty, looked trapped. For the first time in my adult life, I saw fear in his eyes as he looked at me. "What do you want?" he asked hoarsely. I gestured to the empty seat across from me. "Please sit down. We have business to discuss." For a moment, I thought he might refuse, might storm out rather than face me as an equal, but financial self-preservation won out. He took the seat, his movements stiff with suppressed rage. "I've prepared a detailed presentation on Mitchell Enterprises' current situation and our restructuring strategy." I began, my voice steady and professional. "The company has been systematically mismanaged for years, with outdated manufacturing processes, excessive executive compensation, and inadequate investment in research and development. As I outlined the company's failings with clinical precision, I could see my father's face reddening. Each point struck like a physical blow to his ego, his life's work dissected and found wanting by the daughter he'd discarded. "This is absurd," he finally interrupted. "You've manipulated this situation out of some misguided revenge fantasy. You know nothing about running a real manufacturing business." "On the contrary," I replied evenly, sliding a folder across the table. "These are the performance metrics from the 17 companies Mitchell Hayes has acquired and restructured over the past 5 years. Average profitability increases of 37%, workforce retention rates of 86%, and consistent product quality improvements." Blake distributed additional documents to the board members. "You'll find our detailed restructuring plan for Mitchell Enterprises includes retaining the core workforce while modernizing production facilities and expanding your most promising product lines. We project a return to profitability within 18 months. The board members reviewed these materials with growing interest, their expressions shifting from anxiety to cautious optimism as they recognized the potential salvation for their failing company. My father, sensing he was losing his audience, played his final card. "You don't know her," he announced to the room. "My daughter has personal issues, drug problems, emotional instability. This whole scenario is driven by her resentment. She's not qualified to—" "That's enough," Richard interrupted Harold Winters, the longest-serving board member. "We've reviewed Miss Mitchell's qualifications and track record extensively. Mitchell Hayes has an impressive history of successful turnarounds. And regarding those personal issues," I added calmly, "I've taken the liberty of providing the board with documentation of my complete background, including news coverage of my academic achievements, professional certifications, and business successes. Also included are sworn statements from former colleagues refuting the defamatory claims you've made about me over the years." My father's face contorted with a mixture of rage and panic. "This is a hostile takeover." "No," I corrected him. "This is a rescue mission. Mitchell Enterprises employs 500 people whose livelihoods are at risk due to your mismanagement. We're here to save the company, not destroy it." I turned to address the board directly. "As part of our restructuring, we'll be making leadership changes effective immediately. Richard Mitchell will be transitioning out of his role as CEO." "You can't do this," my father sputtered. "The board can and will," Harold Winters said firmly. "The terms of the acquisition agreement are clear, and frankly, Richard, your leadership has brought us to the brink of bankruptcy." What followed was the systematic dismantling of Richard Mitchell's control over the company he had prioritized above his daughter. The board voted unanimously to approve the leadership changes. Documents were signed transferring operational control to Mitchell Hayes executives. Security was quietly summoned to stand by. Through it all, I maintained perfect composure, speaking only when necessary and in the measured tones of a seasoned executive. The abandoned girl screaming in a motel parking lot was nowhere to be seen. As the meeting concluded, my father sat defeated, staring at the table before him. The board members and executives filed out, leaving just Richard, myself, Blake, and Gabriella in the room. "You have 30 minutes to collect your personal items," I informed him. "Security will escort you. Your company phone, laptop, and access credentials will be surrendered before you leave the building." He looked up at me, 15 years of hatred and resentment distilled in his gaze. "You engineered this whole thing just to destroy me. Was it worth it?" For a moment, I considered responding with the full force of my accumulated pain, telling him about the nights I'd gone hungry, the endless work shifts while pursuing my education, the systematic attempts he'd made to sabotage my career. But I recognized his question for what it was, a final attempt to paint me as vengeful and unstable. "This isn't about destroying you, Father. It's about saving what you built despite your best efforts to run it into the ground." The 500 families who depend on this company deserve better leadership. I gathered my documents and stood to leave. "Enjoy your revenge," he called after me, a final desperate attempt to frame the narrative. I paused at the door. This isn't revenge, it's consequences. As security arrived to escort him to clear out his office, I walked away without looking back, just as he had done to me 15 years earlier in that motel parking lot. But unlike him, I wasn't abandoning people who depended on me. I was saving them. In the elevator descending to the lobby, Blake finally broke the silence. "Are you okay?" The question caught me off guard. In all my planning for this confrontation, I hadn't anticipated how it would actually feel to execute it perfectly. "I don't know," I admitted. "I thought I'd feel more triumph or satisfaction or closure. But I mostly feel empty." Gabriella squeezed my arm gently. "That's normal. You've been working toward this moment for so long. Now you have to figure out what comes next." What came next? For 15 years, my father's abandonment had shaped my decisions, driven my ambitions, defined my identity. Now, that chapter had closed. The question remained, who would Samantha Mitchell become when she was no longer defined by what had been done to her? 1 month after the acquisition, Mitchell Enterprises headquarters hummed with renewed energy. We had implemented the first phase of our restructuring plan, eliminating excessive executive perks, investing in equipment upgrades for the main manufacturing facility, and establishing clear communication channels with the workforce. Early results were promising, productivity was increasing, and employee morale had improved dramatically once job security was assured. I had moved temporarily into an office on the executive floor, not taking my father's former space, but rather establishing a new base of operations. The walls displayed framed photographs of our various company locations and their employees, rather than the ego-stroking awards and grip and grin photos that had decorated my father's domain. Blake entered carrying a manila envelope. "This was delivered for you." Hand-delivered, not mail. I opened it to find a single-page letter on expensive stationery. The handwriting was unmistakable, the same sharp, impatient script I remembered from childhood birthday cards and absence notes for school. "My father," I said unnecessarily. Blake nodded, having recognized the sender as well. The note was brief. "Times I need to speak with you. Important matter regarding company history. The Brighton Hotel Room 712 tomorrow at 2 p.m. RM**. "Are you going?" Blake asked, after I'd shown him the message. "I don't know," I admitted. That evening, I hosted Blake and Gabriella at my apartment to discuss the unexpected contact. Over dinner, we debated the possibilities. "It could be a trap," Gabriella warned. "Some last-ditch attempt to undermine your authority, or create a scene he could use against you. Or he could have legitimate information about the company." Blake countered. "Hidden liabilities or partnerships we haven't uncovered yet." Or, I added quietly, he could simply want to face me one last time. "Do you want to see him?" Blake asked. The question hung in the air as I considered it honestly. I think I need to. Not for his sake, but for mine. There are things I've carried for 15 years that I need to set down. "Then we'll come with you," Gabriella said firmly. "No," I replied. "This is something I need to do alone." The following afternoon, I arrived at the Brighton Hotel precisely on time. The irony wasn't lost on me meeting my father in a hotel, mirroring but inverting our last encounter at the Starlight Motel 15 years earlier. Now I arrived in a chauffeured car wearing designer clothes, wielding power he couldn't match. Room 712 was a mid-tier suite, not the luxury accommodation he would have chosen in his prime. I knocked firmly, professionally. The man who opened the door shocked me. In just 1 month since our boardroom confrontation, Richard Mitchell seemed to have aged years. His skin had a grayish pallor, he'd lost weight, and his once commanding posture had crumbled into something almost fragile. "Samantha," he said, stepping aside to let me enter. Thank you for coming. The formality struck me as bizarre after everything that had transpired. I remained standing, declining his gesture toward the sitting area. You said you had information about the company, I stated, maintaining my professional demeanor. He nodded, moving to retrieve a folder from the desk. As he did, I noticed a slight tremor in his hand and a wince of pain as he turned. Are you ill? I asked bluntly. He paused, then gave a short, humorless laugh. Terminal pancreatic cancer. Diagnosed 3 months ago. The news hit me with unexpected force. This man who had loomed so large in my life, first as father, then as abandoner, finally as adversary, was being diminished by forces beyond either of our control. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, surprised to find I meant it. He shrugged. I'm not sharing this for sympathy, just context for what I need to discuss. We settled into the sitting area, maintaining a careful distance. He opened the folder, revealing documents about an early partnership in Mitchell Enterprises history. There's a minority shareholder from the company's founding, he explained. Marcus Weatherby. He owns 8% documentation, buried in old legal filings. He's been inactive for decades, but with the ownership change, he might resurface with claims. I studied the documents, recognizing the legitimate business concern behind this meeting. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. Our legal team will address it. A silence fell between us, heavy, with 15 years of unspoken words. Finally, he cleared his throat. I suppose you hate me, he said, his tone almost conversational. I did, I replied honestly. For many years. But not anymore. I considered the question carefully. Hate requires energy. I'd rather direct elsewhere now. He nodded as if this made perfect sense. Your mother would be proud of you. She always said you had more intelligence and drive than I did. The mention of my mother sparked a flare of anger. Don't speak about her. You lost that right when you threw away her daughter. For the first time, he looked directly at me, his expression unguarded. I know. Another silence stretched between us. Outside traffic sounds filtered through the window, a city continuing its business oblivious to the reckoning occurring in this room. Why did you do it? I finally asked the question that had haunted me for 15 years. The truth, not whatever justification you've told yourself. He stared at his hands for a long moment. After Lauren died, I couldn't function. Every time I looked at you, I saw her. Same expressions, same mannerisms. It was unbearable. So you abandoned your grieving daughter because it was uncomfortable for you. The coldness in my voice surprised even me. No, it was. He stopped, then tried again. Yes, that's exactly what I did. I was selfish and weak and cruel. I told myself it was better for both of us that you were strong enough to make your own way. But really, I just couldn't face my own pain, so I discarded its source. The raw honesty stunned me. I had expected denials, justifications, blame shifting, not this stark acknowledgement. And the rumors about drug problems. The systematic attempts to sabotage my career. He had the grace to look ashamed. Cynthia didn't want complications from my previous marriage. A troubled daughter who'd run away seemed neater than admitting I'd abandoned you. After that, it became necessary to maintain the story. Necessary, I repeated flatly. I'm not defending it, he said quietly. Just explaining. I stood, needing physical distance. You didn't just abandon me. You tried to ensure I'd fail. You actively worked to destroy opportunities for me. What kind of father does that? A terrible one, he answered simply. The kind who doesn't deserve forgiveness. His absence of excuses disarmed me more effectively than any defense could have. For years, I'd imagined this confrontation, rehearsed scathing speeches, anticipated his denials, prepared counter-arguments. His quiet acceptance of culpability left me without a target for my practiced anger. What do you want from me, Richard? I asked, finally deliberately using his first name. Nothing I have any right to ask for, he replied. I just wanted you to know that what you've accomplished is extraordinary, and that I recognize it was, despite me, not because of anything I ever gave you. The acknowledgement so long withheld, so desperately needed during those early years of struggle, arrived too late to heal the wounds it might once have salved. Yet it still affected me, a small key unlocking something tightly secured within my chest. I would have preferred a father over this belated recognition, I said. I know. He looked out the window, his profile sharp against the afternoon light. I don't expect your forgiveness, Samantha. I don't even want it. It would be too easy an absolution for what I did. We sat in silence again, the weight of our shared and separated history filling the room. Finally, I gathered my belongings and stood to leave. What will you do now? I asked. Die, eventually, he said, with surprising matter-of-factness. Probably within 6 months, according to my doctors. Before that, I don't know. An unexpected thought surfaced not from the businesswoman I'd become or the abandoned girl I'd been, but from somewhere new, somewhere still forming. Mitchell Enterprises could use a historical consultant during the transition, I said. Someone who knows the institutional background, the evolution of products and processes. Part-time, no authority, but fairly compensated. He looked up, genuine surprise crossing his features. Why would you offer that? Not for you, I clarified immediately. For me. Because carrying hatred forward serves no purpose. Because proving I'm nothing like you means showing compassion where you showed none. I don't deserve it. No, I agreed. You don't. But I deserve to make choices based on who I want to be, not in reaction to who you were. We made arrangements for him to meet with our HR department. The conversation remained professional, careful, the deep wounds between us acknowledged but not healed. Some injuries leave permanent scars. Some betrayals cannot be undone. But in offering this small olive branch, I felt something shift within me, the first tendrils of freedom from the defining trauma of my life. The following week, I established the Lauren Mitchell Foundation, endowed with $10 million from my personal funds. The foundation would provide educational scholarships and support services for young adults facing financial hardship or family abandonment, resources I had desperately needed at 18. Mitchell Enterprises continued its transformation, guided by the principles of fairness and innovation that had defined Mitchell Hayes Acquisitions from the beginning. We preserved jobs while modernizing facilities, honored institutional knowledge while introducing new methodologies. The company that had once represented my pain became a vehicle for creating opportunity for others. 3 months after our hotel meeting, I visited my mother's grave on her birthday. Richard had been working limited hours as a consultant, maintaining a respectful distance, but providing valuable historical context for our restructuring efforts. His health was deteriorating visibly. He no longer bothered with a pretense of strength. Standing before my mother's headstone, I placed fresh flowers beside the marker. I did it, Mom, I said quietly. I survived. I built something good. I found a way forward. A gentle breeze stirred the cemetery trees, sending dappled sunlight across the peaceful grounds. In that moment, I felt an unexpected sense of completion, not because all wounds were healed or all questions answered, but because I had finally fully claimed ownership of my own story. The abandoned girl with a suitcase had become a woman who could face her past without being consumed by it. The path forward stretched before me, no longer defined by what had been done to me, but by what I chose to create. What's your story of overcoming betrayal? Have you ever had to rebuild after someone who should have supported you let you down? Share in the comments below. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that even our deepest wounds can become the foundation for our greatest strength. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Remember, your past doesn't define your future, your choices do.